Good evening and good morning to all participants and speakers wherever you are. Welcome to the Academic Writing Workshop for International Publication, organized in collaboration between the Social Science Research Council, SSRC, and the American Institute for Indonesian Studies, or IFIS. Can we give a big round of applause for today's event? Perfect. Okay. Okay, this is the second of a two-part collaboration, which has already started in December of 2021, in which IFIS and SSRC presented an introductory workshop on international publication. And this workshop is curated to provide Indonesian scholars with information about publishing in highly ranked English language academic journals. The goal of the workshop is to help researchers prepare manuscripts that will clear an initial editorial screening. The presentations to take place over this 4-day webinar series explain what editors look for when reviewing paper submissions, highlight the underlying dynamics of argumentation in a research article, that the presentation is clear and effective, will increase awareness of linguistic conventions that would help convey ideas not only accurately, but also clearly and appropriately, and we'll discuss strategies for planning and revising a manuscript. And due to the significant amount of interest and participation in this event, we have decided to present the first 4 days of the workshop as a public webinar for all applications to access. And 16 selected participants will continue from this public events to have their individual project discussed in direct consultation with the workshop presenters and have each been paired according to their respective disciplines with individual mentors from IFIS network of scholars of Indonesian studies. But again, in the spirit of equity and inclusion, we present the first 4 days of this workshop as a public seminar so that others may benefit from the knowledge shared by our esteemed presenters, who I'm honored to introduce in a second. So in total, we will have 5 remarkable speakers who are beyond experienced in this field. The first one, I would like to introduce you to Mr. Paul Kratoska. Welcome back, Paul. He was formerly the managing director of NUS Press at the National University of Singapore. He is past editor of the Journal of Southeast Asian Studies and current editor of the Journal of the Malaysian branch of the Royal Asiatic Society. Before going into academic publishing, he taught in several countries, such as the Philippines and Malaysia, and also at the National University of Singapore. He has published a handful of books and articles on the Japanese occupation, the history of rice cultivation, ethnic minorities, school textbooks, and academic publishing, and was a contributor to the Cambridge History of Southeast Asia and the Cambridge History of World War II. And he currently serves on the boards of several journals and is the lead mentor for the Social Science Research Council's Global Scholars Initiative. Welcome, Paul. And the second one, we have Susan Lopez-Nerni, who designed, coordinated, and taught language, writing, and professional communication courses for undergraduates and graduates in the Center for English Language Communication at the National University of Singapore from 1992 until 2013. She has conducted writing workshops for graduate degree candidates and junior faculty in Japan, Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaysia, Taiwan, Thailand, the Philippines, and also Indonesia. She is also now the mentor for the US Social Science Research Council's Global Scholars Initiative. Welcome, Susan. It's good to have you here again.
See you again. I'm looking forward to working with you.
Thank you. And the third one, we will have Paul Nerni. He designed, taught, and coordinated courses in English as the second language and English as a first school language for the Center for English Language at NUS. He also worked under the Provost's office to design, teach, and coordinate writing and critical thinking models for the University Scholars Program and University Town Residential Program. More recently, he has conducted writing workshops for graduate degree candidates and junior faculty in Japan, Singapore, Malaysia, Taiwan, Thailand, the Philippines, Hong Kong, and also Indonesia. And also, he is the mentor for US Social Science Research Council's Global Scholars Initiatives. Hi, Paul.
Good evening. How are you? Nice to see you
Evening.
again, Furman.
Great, thank you. The fourth one, we have Linda Grove. She is the consulting director of the Social Science Research Council's Tokyo office and the program director for the Council's Global Scholars Initiative. She formerly taught Chinese social and economic history at Sophia University in Tokyo, where she served as the dean and vice president with responsibility for international programs and research management. And her publications include books and articles on Chinese rural industrialization and social change, East Asian trade history, and Chinese women's history, as well as the translations of Japanese and Chinese scholarship on Chinese history. Hi, Linda.
Hi.
Thank you. And lastly, we will also have Mr. Siddha Chandra, who is the director of the Asian Studies Center and professor of economics in James Madison College at Michigan State University, as well as past president of the IFIS. And prior to joining Michigan State University, he was the director of the Asian Studies Center and associate professor at the Graduate School of Public and International Affairs at the University of Pittsburgh. Thank you very much. So those are the 5 presenters who will bring a rich diversity of experience in international publication. And we thank you in advance for sharing your knowledge with all of us today and for the next 4 days. With that, so without further ado, I would like to share the screen with Linda Grove to convey welcome remarks on behalf of the Social Science Research Council. Linda.
Hi. Good evening, everyone. As Furman has said, I'm the director of the Tokyo office of the Social Science Research Council. The Social Science Research Council is America's oldest social science organization. It will celebrate its 100th anniversary next year. It was originally formed by representatives of major social science academic organizations in the US with the intention of trying to bring the best of social science research to bear on public policy. And we continue to have that interest to try to develop capacity in the social sciences and in research, and then to see that that is reflected in decisions about important problems that affect us all. For example, we have just started a new project that is called the Mercury Project, named after the Roman god. And its basic project is funded by 7 major foundations. The aim is to look at the problem that is very prominent now in the world of misinformation, to figure out how misinformation is disseminated and what might be done to educate people so that there is less damage from such kind of disinformation spreading. I want to say a little bit about the Global Scholars Workshop, about our aims in setting this up. I should say first that the funding for this project comes from the Luce Foundation, and they have generously funded us now for several years. We've held writing workshops in East Asia, in Japan, in Korea, in Taiwan, and in Southeast Asia, not only in Indonesia, but in Malaysia, in Thailand, and we will be holding one very shortly in the Philippines. The aim of this, it really has sort of 2 aims. The first aim is to help all of you, those of you who are participating. Over the last 10 or 15 years or so, the pressure on young scholars to publish internationally has become very strong. Competition for jobs and for promotions is much more difficult than it was 20 or 30 years ago, and publishing in English has become one of the standards that universities and research institutions expect you all to meet. And so part of the aim of this is, in fact, to help all of you, to give you information on publishing, to help you figure out how to write for foreign audiences, and then how to go through the publishing process to get your article submitted and accepted. We share with you the joy when we hear that the articles that you've been working on, in fact, are published in English journals. But there's another side of this that has to do with audiences all over the world. For, as I think many of you know, I think in Indonesian studies, there's been great debate about this. that international discourses have been dominated by scholars writing in English and usually based in English-speaking countries, the US, the UK, Australia, Canada. This means that sometimes the people who know most about the situation, for example, in Indonesia or other places in Asia and Southeast Asia, et cetera, are not in fact getting their material out there where people can connect with it. And so one of the other aims is in fact to see that your research is presented to an international audience. In doing that, our definition of international is not just English-speaking people in English-speaking countries. It also includes the ability for all of you to reach audiences in other Asian countries or in Latin America, Africa, other places who do not work, whose native language is not English and who write, but who don't know, for example, Indonesian or don't know Chinese and can use the common language of English to exchange information, to exchange ideas, et cetera. So our aims are to help you build your careers, but on the other hand, also to help the rest of the world learn from your very detailed knowledge and your views on what is going on in the areas that you are researching. So we look forward to working with all of you in the next few days, and we look forward to ongoing relationships. So thank you all. I turn it now over to Joseph, the director of ISIS in Indonesia, who is going to make some remarks.
Okay. Hello. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Linda, for the kind remarks. Welcome to the IFIS Academic Writing Workshop. This is the writing workshop for the fourth time we're doing it online, but we have IFIS has been doing workshops since 2018. At the time, we did it still offline from at the University of Indonesia, at Majaya University, and at UGM. And then this is our fourth online workshop at the moment with the support from Henry Luce Foundation and also Social Science Research Center. This workshop is a special, as like the other workshop too. For this particular workshop, we had around 90 applicants, and we selected 16 applicants for the one-on-one mentoring. This is the only type of writing workshop that they provide a one-on-one mentoring with our mentors here, our esteemed mentors, Paul Krutoska, hello, and Paul Nerden and Susan. Nice to see you all back here.
Yes, good to see you again.
Yeah, and we also already make a schedule for those who are accepted, the 16 applicants, to have a one-on-one mentor with our network, IFIS network. Please check our website at ifis.org and also follow our social media channel at our Instagram, IFIS Indonesia, and also on Facebook. And with this opportunity, I would like also to inform everyone here about our upcoming conference, IFIS Indonesia Studies Conference, that will be held online, fully online. This is the second one. It will be held on June 21st to June 25. The information for this conference can also be found in our website. Please join our conference, because it's a good opportunity for everyone here that are interested to present their work and to meet people around the world that are studying about Indonesia. And without further ado, I would like to thank everyone to be here, and I wish you all productive workshop in the 4 days, the next 4 days. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Linda and Joseph. I think to sum up, I'm sure that this 4-day event will be highly beneficial for all of us, including me, who is trying to not only to get published, but also to produce a good publication. Okay, but before we begin, I want to outline a few logistical details for the webinar. Since the first day since the first 4 days of this workshop are being offered in a public forum, we asked that you direct your questions by typing them into the Q&A feature of the webinar. I believe that you can find the Q&A button below your screen. And please also don't forget to include your name and institution to let us know where you are coming from. And during the sessions and at the end of each day of presentation, the moderators will direct your questions to the workshop presenters. And also, the workshop is being streamed on YouTube and will remain accessible after the event. We will drop the links into the chat box so you can access the videos at the start of each day. And after the event, you will also be able to find the links at ifis.org/academic writing. All right, so without further ado, I think it is my pleasure to officially commence the part 2 of the IFIS SSRC Academic Writing Workshop. I will now invite Paul Kratoska to begin our first presentation on what journal editors look for in reviewing manuscripts and writing for publication and editor's perspective. Paul.
Well, thank you very much. Let me just get things set up here. Okay, we've done a number of these workshops over the years, and one of the points that comes up repeatedly is that many authors don't really know what happens after they submit their manuscript, and specifically, what is it that an editor looks for when reviewing a manuscript. So this talk is really about that, and I'll follow it up with a second presentation, which is oriented toward helping you understand how to write an article that meets the expectations of an editor. Let me just clear that out of the way, okay? So if I went around and talked to everybody that's listening to this about what editors want, my guess is that nobody would have the answer that I'm about to give you. What editors are really concerned about is readers. Because articles that are not read waste people's time, they waste their effort, and sometimes an editor gets an article that it seems interesting, it seems pretty good, but it's pretty obvious that the journal that the editor is handling is not the right place for it, that journal doesn't reach the correct audience. So a lot of editorial discussions, and this is true not only for a journal but also for book publishing, they begin with two questions, and the first question is, who is going to read this? And if the answer is we can't figure it out, that may be the end of the discussion. And the second question is, what is the author trying to get across? What is the author hoping to communicate to readers? And is that important? Well, what the author is trying to say should be clear from reading the abstract and maybe the introduction of an article. As for whether it's important, authors really should be explaining that also maybe in the abstract and certainly in the introduction. So, if an article has no obvious audience, if it has no argument, if it doesn't seem to contribute very much, the author is likely to receive what is called a desk rejection. And a desk rejection is simply saying, thank you for submitting this. It's not right for us for whatever reason. We're not going to referee it. And that's the end of the story. So if you get a desk rejection, it's not a happy sight to see that letter in front of you. But realistically, there's nothing for you to do about this. You just sit down and you cry for a day or so, and then you think, okay, where else can I go to publish this article? The publishing process, as most people envision it, certainly as I envisioned it, looks a bit like this. You start off, you do your research, And then, okay, you need to publish, so you pick a topic. And you select the material that you're going to use in writing up that topic. You write it up. You submit the manuscript. And then after a few weeks, you get referees' reports. These days, almost no articles are accepted without some kind of revision. So the likelihood is very large that even if the journal is interested, they will ask you to revise and resubmit. So you do that, the article is accepted, you get page proofs, you do the proofreading, and eventually you receive a copy of the publication. Now these days, unfortunately, you may just be given a digital copy. Now this is the publishing process, certainly as I pictured it when I started out. But it leaves out an important step, and that is an editorial review. So after manuscripts are submitted, editors will look at the manuscript and say, does this have any chance? If it doesn't, then you get the desk rejection, and none of that I had on the right is going to happen. Okay, well, if editors want readers, then the logical question is, what do readers want? And fundamentally, you can break this down into three things. Readers want information, they want explanation, and they want interpretation. So let's consider what those things are. And in saying this, this is also what an editor is going to look for in an article. Publications begin with information. You're writing about something in the world, something that has happened, some situation. And information is essentially the answer to factual questions. Questions of what, who, when, and where. And this information comes from sources that you can verify. You may work in an archive, you may do survey research, but you don't just pull this information out of thin air. You have found this information somewhere. And so if somebody says, well, where did you get that idea? Where did that come from? You should be able to go back and say, this is the source. And then you cite it in whatever you're writing. That indicates your sources. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that the information is accurate or correct, but it is verifiable in the sense that you can say, I didn't invent this. This is something that I got from a particular source, and you can say what that source is. Then there's explanation. And explanation is why or how something took place. Unfortunately, a lot of people stop after they provide information. And honestly, as an editor, if I see an article which simply provides information, which simply is factual and doesn't try to explore why the situation occurred or how something happened, I'm usually not very enthusiastic about that article. And then there's interpretation. This is why it matters, the consequences and the implications of what you're saying. Now, both explanations and interpretations actually look like statements of fact. So let's say we're talking about COVID. So perhaps I say to you, COVID spreads because, and I give you an explanation about my understanding anyway of how COVID spreads. Or interpretation. COVID's economic effects are, and then I list that. Now, both of those sentences look like a statement of fact, but in fact, in reality, they're not. Now, information will be either right or wrong, but explanations and interpretations are fundamentally arguments. I tell you that COVID spreads because of these factors. Somebody else may come along and say, well, you forgot about this, or there's new research that shows this. And that's exactly the way scholarship works, is that people provide explanations, and then somebody else reads that, and there's a discussion. So what happens in an editorial evaluation? Well, the fundamental questions an editor will ask are these. What is the research question? And what is the answer? And this is the absolutely critical thing. The answer is an argument. The editor will want to know if the author is qualified to write about the topic. And by that, if you've done your PhD dissertation on this topic, if you've had a research project, that's the kind of thing an editor might want to know. And then, will the topic interest readers of the journal? Now, this is one of the things that is a little bit hard for an author, but editors will be quite clear about this. And I'll talk to you a little bit later about how you get an idea of picking a journal. This will be later in this workshop. Is the organization of the paper any good? Is the writing clear? And for that, the editor will dip into it a little bit. Are the sources up to date? One day I got an article submitted, and when I was looking at it, I looked at the sources that the author had used. This was about 2 years ago, and I realized that there was no source later than 1996. Well, of course, that's 25 years ago. And I thought to myself, I know what's happened here. And I went onto the Google search, and I discovered that in 1996, that author got his PhD dissertation finished. So it was pretty clear that what he was doing was going back to his PhD, pulling out a chapter and hoping to get it published. He might have been publishable if he brought it up to date, but certainly something that is where the sources are 25 years old doesn't have much of a chance. And then, are the citations done properly? So these are all things, for the most part anyway, things that an author can check. And you should check those things before you submit an article. How will an editor go about looking for answers to those questions? Honestly, what happens with an initial screening is that the editor is going to depend very heavily on the title, the abstract, and the keywords, the introduction and conclusion, headings and subheadings, and to some extent the mechanics, that is the citations and the bibliography. And all of this doesn't really get at whether the content is any good, whether the information that's being provided is accurate, whether there are internal contradictions. And the reason for that is, if an editor decides to go ahead and evaluate an article, they'll send it out to referees, and the referees will be content specialists. And so the referees are going to be evaluating content. Who's going to read your article? Well, let's understand how journals work, because every journal serves a different set of readers. And editors have a pretty good idea who reads their journal. These days, because you have all sorts of ways to check online how many articles have been opened and downloaded, they have an idea of what articles have been popular, and they're able to select articles that suit their audience. So authors need to write for a specific audience and then try to pick a journal that serves that audience. Now, as I said, later on in this workshop, we'll talk about journal selection. But in the first instance, the important thing is writing for an audience. And what I mean by that is that if you have done research, there are probably several different audiences that you could write for. And perhaps one audience has a lot of interest in technical detail, maybe statistics. Another audience doesn't care much about statistics, they just want to know what the result is. So you have choices in how you prepare an article, and you need to think about your audience. Now, there are particular challenges faced by authors in Asia in writing and in getting published. And this is something I'll talk about a bit later today. But those principal challenges, anyway, are first, persuading an international audience to read articles that are based on local data. Well, Indonesian authors probably are doing research in Indonesia. The data they're collecting will be about Indonesian situations. So the question is, how do you get readers in North America or Europe or Mexico or South America to read an article about Indonesia? And there are some solutions to that. What you need to remember too is that this is not a problem that is particularly or peculiar to Indonesia or to Asia. There's been quite a lot of research into what happens to researchers in some of the smaller countries in Europe, in Spain, in Portugal, in Hungary, when they submit articles. Because again, what they're doing is writing about local situations. And they have exactly the same problem. If you've studied the Spanish family, and you may have done a very good job of understanding how the Spanish family works, but outside of Spain, who's going to care about that? Okay, so that's what I'll talk about in the third part of my presentation today. The other thing that's a great challenge for authors in Asia arises from the fact that they generally are not native speakers of English, and the writing conventions and for English language publication and Asian language publication are not the same. I'll have a little bit more to say about that too. You need to pay particular attention in preparing an article to the title, the abstract, and the key words. And the reason for that is partly that this is one of the things that an editor will look for, but also if you get published and somebody is doing a search online and trying to find information about whatever topic, what they'll see is those three things. They'll see the title, the abstract, and the keywords. And they will make a decision. Do I want to pursue this? Do I want to read this article? Based on those three things. Then there's the introduction and the conclusion. And again, these are critical. Now, when do you write the abstract? When do you write the introduction? Generally speaking, you should have an idea of what you're doing. You have to have an idea of what you're doing when you get started. But the final version of the abstract and the final version of the introduction is something that you'll write after you've written the article, because almost everybody in the process of writing an article changes their thinking. As you write, you see things that you hadn't seen before you started to write. And that's an important point if you have any trouble writing. My clear advice, if you find writing difficult, is just to start. Pick something out of your research that you really do understand. Some story or some episode or just something that you can write a page or two about. And just write it down. Don't worry too much about the language. Don't worry about where it's going. Just start writing. Because once you start writing, you'll start seeing much more about where you might go with your article. You write something, and what's going to happen is you'll think to yourself, okay, if I'm going to say, before I say that, I would have to say this other thing. Or after I say this is the logical place for me to go. Also bear in mind that people are not going to read the article in the same way. So some people are going to skim the article. All they want to do is to pick out the main points. They might later on go back and read it in detail, but for the time being, their attitude is, okay, this is potentially interesting to me. I want to know what is in there, but I'm not going to read all the detail. Some people are going to look at your article, and they're going to read certain sections of it in detail, but not all of it. And to help them out, this is where you need to have good headings and subheadings. And then there'll be a few people who will read the entire article. They read it very carefully because they have a deep interest in the subject. But an editor is looking for articles that serve all of these readers. So as you write an article, you should be thinking about the reader who's going to skim it, the reader who's going to only read certain sections, and put in signposts along the way that will help that person get out of the article what they want. Okay, so part one of this session is the shortest, and it is now over. So we will take a very short break, and then we will start up with part two.
Very much, Paul. So yeah, ladies and gentlemen, we will have a short break. So Paul, we will pull all of the questions after the second. All right, cool. All right, so we will have a short break. And then after that, we will continue to the second session from Mr. Paul Kratoska on strategies for writing for international publications. All right, see you.
Okay, I think we can start again.
Okay, so welcome back for everyone. So we're going to directly start our second session from Mr. Paul Kratoska. Paul?
Thank you. So this section is about writing for publication. And the first point, maybe this is one of the fundamental points, is that research begins with questions, but writing begins with answers. Often I've gotten articles, and the beginning of the article, the author is explaining what questions the article is going to answer. In this article, I'm going to examine, I'm going to explore this, this, and this, and this. The problem there is by the time you write an article, you should know the result of your exploration. You should know the answer to your questions. So you don't want to begin an article that you're submitting for publication by talking about the questions you're going to answer, you want to begin with the answers. Research is a very messy process. You gather all kinds of information, some of it useful, some of it maybe not so useful. But writing has to be clear and orderly. I mean, what you're doing as an author is taking all sorts of detail and you're trying to turn it into a story, trying to explain it to your readers in a way to help them understand. So when an author comes with an article and basically says or tells me, okay, this is how I did my research. I did this, and this. Well, they're just writing about all the confusion and all the strain and all the effort they went through. This is not what you want to send off to an editor. Okay, so to write an article, you need to have several things. First of all, you need a topic. And just one topic. Sometimes people submit manuscripts where they actually have talked about 2 or even 3 topics. And that generally doesn't lead to anything good because it's hard enough to explain a single topic in an article that runs 6,000, 7,000 words. So settle on one topic and one research question. It has to be a question that you can answer in the course of an article. And then you have to present the answer to your research question. That's your argument. And you provide the evidence to support your answer. One of the first things I do when I receive a manuscript is look at it and ask myself, what question is this author answering? And is there an answer here? Is the author effectively dealt with that question? To publish, you also need a good presentation. And part of what we're doing in this workshop is talking to you about how to present material. Okay, so I said before, articles contain information, explanation, and interpretation. And that what you have there is verifiable sources. So just repeating these points. Okay. So when you plan your paper, you begin with a fact. The title of the article should indicate or suggest at least what this fact is. And there should be a statement of that fact at the start of your abstract. There should be a statement of that at the start of your introduction. And then you follow that with explanation and interpretation. But explanation and interpretation are the core of your article, and everything else needs to be tied at least to explanation, ideally to interpretation. Before you start writing a paper, you really want to answer these questions. First of all, who should read your paper? This is your audience. And why would they be interested? What question are you answering? What is the answer? How will you support your answer? And how will you organize your paper? So as I said earlier, the titles, abstracts, and keywords are picked up by research engines. They're visible as part of e-journal contents, and readers will use them to decide whether they're going to read an article. The introduction explains what an article does. Think of it as sort of a roadmap. It starts off by telling you this is our destination. This is the point that I'm going to make. So you start off by presenting an argument. Then the question is, do I, as a reader, accept your argument? Well, the only way I'll accept this is if you provide evidence. The conclusion. Bear in mind, you're not writing murder mysteries. And so the conclusion is not the place to tie everything together and say, okay, I've presented all this wonderful detail. Now I'm going to surprise you with an answer. The conclusion of an academic article should simply state what the article has accomplished. you start off by saying, this is what I'm going to do. The conclusion says, this is what I have done. And in the body, you use headings and subheadings to outline the article. So let's talk a little bit about these different elements. So the title should indicate the topic. It needs to position the material in time and place. It needs to attract readers, and it should be brief, something like 10 to 12 words, and it obviously needs to be clear. In preparing a title, you want to avoid jargon, you want to avoid obscure terms, you don't want to do something clever or cute, and you don't want to put in unfamiliar abbreviations. As for the abstract should be short, something like 150 to 200 words. And in the abstract, you need to present the research topic, you need to answer the research question, and that means you state the argument. You need to say why the research is significant, and the abstract really should stand alone as an explanation. In other words, somebody reading the abstract should know what the article is about. It should know where you're going with that. Now, I had somebody come to my office one time with a book manuscript, and I told him, well, it's interesting, but you really need to start off by telling your reader where you're going. What is your argument? And he said, I can't do that. So I said, well, why can't you do that? And he said, well, it's very simple. If I start off by giving the answer to my research question, nobody's going to read the book. Well, it's not the way to view these things, because people will read the book. If they're interested in the detail. What the abstract should not do is try to describe the existing literature. It should not explain or criticize the work of other writers, and it should not provide a lot of extensive detail. For example, you do not want to say, this article will discuss point A, point B, and point C. What you do want to say is that based on a study of point A, point B, and point C, I conclude that, and then you state what the conclusion is. Another thing you don't want to do is start off an abstract by saying, in this article, I attempt to show something, or I try to show, or what you want to do is say, in this article, I show something, I demonstrate something. Now, if that seems too strong for you, you have an option. You can say, in this article, I argue something. As for keywords, keywords are search terms. Their purpose is to attract readers and get articles into search results. How many do you want? Well, probably 5 to 10. And they should identify important points in the article. There's a lot of advice online about selecting keywords, and you can just do a Google search on keywords and see what kind of advice you can turn up. As you're doing this, though, think about yourself as a reader. Consider what would attract you to an article. What kind of keyword would be appealing to you as a potential reader of an article? Okay, after you've prepared a list of terms, then what you need to do is do a search. Go to Google Scholar, enter the words one by one that you have picked, and see what comes up. The articles that appear really should resemble your own article. Okay, then we come to headings. And what you should do is, in an article, you group paragraphs so that you're telling a small story within the larger story. So under a particular heading, you have several paragraphs that deal with a common theme. somebody looking through the headings of your article should be able to see how the article proceeds step by step. The headings should allow readers to follow a discussion without reading the entire article. And this goes back to what I said just a little bit ago, that some readers are going to be interested in just a quick survey, or some readers may want to just read one section in depth. So the purpose of the headings is to help readers who are not going to sit around and read the entire article, but actually they provide guidance even if you are going to read the whole thing, because it helps to have a sense of where you're going. So as a reader, you don't necessarily just sit down and start with the first sentence of an article and read it through. You'll be a much more effective reader if you start off by just going through the article, look at the headings, try to get an idea of what the author is doing before you start reading in detail. You'll find that you understand the article much better. And as a writer, you need to understand that approach and help the readers make sense of what you're doing. So the introduction, it's an opening paragraph that tells readers where an article is going and how you're going to get there. It should begin with the facts that you're exploring and the answer to your research question. And as I said earlier, don't start by saying, this is the question I'm going to answer. And the conclusion, the conclusion is a closing paragraph that simply repeats the answer. It should not say anything new. So let's take an example of how this might work. I was doing some research the other day, and I came across an article that was talking about wheat consumption in Indonesia. And it was saying that wheat consumption is increasing in Indonesia. Well, this is a statement of fact. It might be true, it might be false. But let's say that you were going to write something about that. Well, the evidence that you might present would be Indonesia's wheat imports have been rising. The consumption of foods containing wheat, such as instant noodles and bread, is rising. There's been an increase in the number of local mills producing wheat flour. Or perhaps the evidence, you've done a survey and you've found out that the respondents to your survey are consuming more wheat. So this is the information that you can provide. Then the explanation. Well, the explanation would be, why is wheat consumption increasing? Well, let's just offer a possibility. Wheat consumption is increasing in Indonesia because of the taste, convenience, and cost of instant noodles. Now that's an argument. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. You would have to present evidence for that. But if you're writing an article, you move from, go back here. You move from the evidence to an explanation. And then you are looking for an interpretation. So the interpretation, if wheat consumption is increasing in Indonesia, what are the consequences? Well, there would be consequences in agriculture. The demand for rice, nutrition. If people are eating highly processed food, that will affect nutrition. There might be consequences for the balance of trade because of the amount of wheat that's being imported. There would be implications for the carbon footprint arising from external transport, the import, and also internal transport. So if you were writing this article, you start off with information, then you provide the explanation, and finally the interpretation. Now, I made this example up, but if you're interested, I was just browsing around, and here are a couple of starting points. You can go back and look at this later if you're interested. One thing I want to call attention to, though, is the number of identifiers. So a DOI is a digital object identifier, and material that is published digitally these days has a digital object identifier. There's also a record identifier and a persistent uniform resource locator. Now, all of these things, if you do a search, will take you to this article. You as an author cannot create these. These are created by publishers. What you as an author probably do need to do is have what they call an ORCID identifier, ORCID. That's a unique name for an author. And the importance of that is that there are authors who have identical names. So if you have an ORCID identifier, that will group together all of your publications and distinguish them from publications by other people. Okay, then we come to the citations, the bibliography. You have two choices. There are in-text citations, the footnotes or the endnotes. So you have two options for producing your citations. If you're doing in-text citations, and many people do these days, don't forget the page. If you have cited something, probably all you need is the author and the date, cited a source. But if you've quoted something, then you need to add the page number. Will there be a bibliography, and how will it be put together? Well, that will depend on the format of the citations. So if you're doing in-text citations, the bibliography will take a particular format, and I won't go through that now, but I'm sure you've seen these, where you have the name of the author, followed by the year of publication, and then the details. However, one other thing to say about all this is that when you're writing, you need to follow the style sheet of the journal you've chosen. Journals will have two pieces of information generally available on their web pages. One is talking about the kind of articles that they're looking for. And this is, of course, very helpful if you're trying to pick a journal, because the journal is going to tell you, we want this kind of thing, and probably that's telling you we don't want some other type of thing. So you try to match what you're doing with what the journal says it wants. And then the style sheet. The style sheet of a journal is telling you things about the formatting, how they prefer that you do the citations, and how they want the manuscript to look. Now, it's important that you pay attention to this, but some journals will say, well, if we're going to reject an article, there's no point in you bringing the article in line with our style sheet. So some journals will say, all right, you can submit an article using any style, but if we accept it, then we're going to insist that you follow our style sheet. So I'll say just a little bit now about a literature review. People in doing dissertations do a literature review. And the idea of that is to demonstrate that they have mastered a body of scholarly literature. But what you need to understand in an article, first of all, articles are short. And an article that you write should be about your data, about your analysis. And if you spend a lot of time repeating what other scholars have said, that cuts down on the amount of space you have available for your own data and your own analysis. What you do need to do is explain where what you have done, your article, fits in with what other scholars have done in the past. So you need some kind of reference, but be selective. Don't try to list everything related to your topic. Another piece of advice, when you're doing a review ideas rather than authors. oftentimes somebody will do a literature review and they start off saying, oh, author A, this person, bracket 2012, has said this, and author B has said that. That's actually very difficult to follow. And there is a much better way to do it. So you can say something like this. Many authors have argued, and then you state the argument, and at the end of that you list the authors. Okay, now maybe an alternative approach has emerged. You list the authors connected with that. So what you're doing is talking about ideas rather than focusing on the authors. And then what you can do after that is that you go on to say, this article adds to the discussion by arguing, and you state your argument, maybe based on a case study of something. And in doing that, what you're doing is positioning your article in the context of what other people have done. Certainly what you want to do in preparing a literature review is limit it to articles that are actually relevant to what your article is doing. So if I could summarize, what an author has to do actually in some ways is a bit simple. You have a topic. What you have to do with that topic is introduce it, explain it, justify it, and position it with respect to what other people have done in the past. And you want to have an argument. You introduce that argument, you explain it, you position it, and you support it, and then you provide a summary. An article has certain parts, a title, abstract, keywords, introduction. So all the things that an author needs to do have to be fit in to these sections. So once you've worked out what you're trying to do in an article, then spend a bit of time thinking, okay, where in this do I need to say a particular thing? Now obviously the body of the article, the sections and subsections, are the heart of this. It's where the bulk of your content is. But you need to plan how you're going to introduce information so that your readers will understand it. And finally, just to remind you that there are going to be editorial concerns. And so the editors are going to be looking at your topic and they want to know who's going to read it, what is the significance, and some of these other points that I went through earlier on. So as you prepare your article, you might just bear these things in mind. So with that, that's the end of part 2. And what I'm going to talk about in part 3 then is this issue about how authors in Indonesia or any other country who are looking at local information, local material, how those authors can appeal to readers of an international refereed journal. So we'll have another short break.
All right, thank you very much, Paul. So yeah, we already had the second session from Paul Kratowska, what editors look for in reviewing manuscripts, along with writing for publication and literature perspective. And later on, we will continue to our third session by Paul. So again, I would like to remind all the participants, if you have questions, feel free to direct the question using the Q&A feature on your Zoom screen while we're having a short break. Okay, see you in a couple minutes.
Okay, I think we could begin.
Sure. Okay, this is our third session from Paul Kwiatkowska talking about strategies for writing for international publications. Once again, if you have any questions, please feel free to put it in the Q&A, question and answer chat box below your screen. And also, please don't forget to state your institution so we will know where you are coming from. Okay, Paul, please.
Okay. Well, as I said before, people writing about local topics have a problem. Now, academic discussion takes place in two streams or channels. There are local, national, and regional publications, and there are also international publications. Sorry, and so local details are primarily going to interest local audiences. So what do international readers look for? Well, fundamentally, they look for approaches or conclusions that will be relevant to their own research. So if you have collected information about Indonesia, local issues or even national issues, you've collected the information locally, there are actually something like 9,000 academic journals produced in Indonesia where you might publish this information. The problem that you face, and I'm sure you know this, is that universities expect their staff to publish in international journals. So the problem for you as a scholar is, how do you interest an international audience in local information or discussion of local matters? So let's do a bit of comparison. National publications are read by national language speech communities. Obviously, if you write in Indonesian, the people who you're writing for read Indonesian, where international journals are mainly in English, and they're read by a wide range of scholars. The concerns that are addressed in national journals are a bit different from those in international journals. There are issues that are significant and discussed by scholars within any given country. So just to give you a quick example, 1995, I published an article by a man named Tongchai Wunichakun, who's a Thai scholar, and he was talking about what scholars in Thailand at that point were particularly interested in. And one of the topics was regionalism, basically saying that the Thai government had had concerns over the years about what would happen if they emphasized the differences between central Thailand, northern, northeast, east, and south. And so this was a topic that really was very interesting to Thai scholars, but maybe not so interesting to scholars in other countries. So journals in Thailand, written in Thai, were talking about this. Journals outside of Thailand, if they published articles in Thailand, probably were not. one of the things we've discovered in doing these workshops is that a lot of scholars in Southeast Asia are interested in practical topics. One Burmese scholar was talking about water supplies at the village level, and the reason was that he came from a village in Myanmar where there were water issues. And so as part of his research, he was trying to understand something that would have relevance to the people that he knew in the place that he came from. Where international journals, there's a tendency to focus on theoretical issues. The academic literature that's cited in a national level journal is often a local literature, maybe with a bit of reference to prominent authors outside of the country. The international journals focus on English language academic literature. And then there's the question of writing conventions. The national journals will emphasize local writing convention, well, maybe not emphasize, but they will accept local writing conventions, where the international journals are focused on English language writing conventions. So let's take a specific example. Supposing that there's a journal article with this title, Historical Records of Flooding in Raub, Pahang, Malaysia. So why would anybody outside of Malaysia read this article? How many people outside of Malaysia would be interested in details? Raub is a small town in Pahang. How many people would be interested in the specific details about flooding in Raub? And I suspect not very many. However, if you were to use this material to talk about deforestation and flooding, or about climate change and rainfall, possibly you'll be able to attract readers from other countries simply because they have those same concerns about deforestation or about climate change. And then you use the details about this particular place as a case study to support a discussion at a higher level. If you're trying to publish in international journals, it's smart to study the style of the articles that they publish. And in doing that, you probably want to think in terms of abstractions or generalizations. So if you're looking perhaps at a local election, again, you have details that people are probably not going to be very interested in outside. However, if you write about a local election in terms of power, authority, leadership, legitimacy, issues like that, and perhaps how a local leader achieves legitimacy, this kind of thing would have relevance to readers in other places. So again, the focus can be on something that would be relevant to people outside of the country. And again, what you want to be doing is looking at the local details as an example or a case study. Another thing you can do is use a theoretical approach that might interest readers elsewhere. So for example, you maybe analyze something, you say, okay, we're going to do class analysis or subaltern studies or gender analysis. And then people who are not so concerned about the detail of your study, but they might be interested in how you apply class analysis or how you're applying a subaltern approach. And when you're doing an article for an international journal, you need to position what you're saying within an international literature. Now, this used to be a major problem for Indonesia because very few libraries had a substantial collection of international journals. It's gotten easier because so much is online, but it's still a problem. And another thing to pay attention to is that if you are using a book that has been translated, if you're citing it, you need to go to the original. Don't trust the translation, because frequently the translations are inaccurate. So another strategy you might adopt is that you try to contrast interesting variables. So perhaps you could look at education and political attitudes, or social class and religious belief, female education and national development. Again, what you're trying to do is to find an angle where you can write about your material that you've collected locally and interest people in other parts of the world. Some more examples, maybe the adoption of new technology by the elderly, coping strategies used by the poor, the effects of climate change on coastal communities. So the same issue in all of these suggestions, you have done local research, and you're trying to find a way to make use of that and have them read. And as I started off saying at the beginning of these presentations, what journal editors are concerned about is readers. And so if you send in an article and it doesn't look to an editor like there will be very many people interested in what you're saying, you're probably going to get rejected. So what you need to be doing is thinking through some way that you can appeal to readers more broadly. Now, another suggestion is that you think about different possible audiences. So let's say that you've done research on a local election. Well, the obvious audience for that would be students of power and authority. But there are other potential readers. So, for example, students of social media, of communications, of voting psychology. So you have details about your topic, and you can be selective. You can say, okay, what kind of story can I put together using the information I've collected in order to appeal to this broader audience. And likewise, somebody who's just doing research on, let's say the election took place in Sulawesi, so somebody's studying Sulawesi or some locality there where the election occurred. You could also attract them as possible readers. But readership is going to depend on what aspect of the story you emphasize. So just to pursue this a little bit further, you can use local details to illustrate general points in this way. So if you were doing an article on anti-smoking campaigns in Singapore, well, again, who's going to be very interested in that? But supposing, because Singapore uses social pressure, so supposing instead of anti-smoking campaigns, you say your article is about using social pressure to reduce smoking, and you take examples from Singapore. Or instead of writing about the Grameen Bank in Bangladesh, you write about microfinance for female entrepreneurs with examples from Bangladesh. You can also sometimes attract more readers just by thinking through what you have in your article. So some years back, I processed an article on the Cambodian textile industry. And this article made it very clear that the textile industry in Cambodia depended very heavily on Chinese foreign direct investment. So the question is, if you have a title, the Cambodian textile industry, who's going to read this? Well, there are certain readers. People are interested in Southeast Asian textiles. People are interested in Cambodia. But if you add in Chinese foreign direct investment, then you have broadened your potential readership considerably. And that's one of the main things you want to do. So your writing strategy, you want to try to, you can explore local examples of global phenomena. You can discuss situations with parallels elsewhere. So several years ago, I was involved in a workshop at UE, and somebody there had done a study of primary education in a rural village in the Sundanese area. And the situation there was that the children in that village only spoke Sundanese at home. And because they were in the hills, there wasn't very good connections to television and so on. So they really started off school with very little exposure to Indonesian. And yet when they went to school, they attended classes taught in Bahasa Indonesia. So the article, that the author had two choices. He could write about that village and the readership would be very small. On the other hand, if he wrote about the experiences of children whose home and school languages were different, this is a situation that comes up quite frequently in all sorts of different countries. And so this again would be an opportunity to broaden your readership. Okay, finally I said that there are differences between Asian language and English language academic writing. And there have been a number of studies, basically just about every country in Asia. There have been specialists looking into this, looking at how people write in Asian languages, how they present information, what they include and what they don't include, compared to the standard way of writing in English. So here are some examples of differences. Asian language writing often relies on indirect statements, and frequently this is a matter of passive voice, as opposed to direct statements or active voice. So supposing I give you a sentence that says, the candidate for the coming election was accused of corruption. Well, this gives you an important piece of information. But you're missing something quite critical, and that is who accused that candidate of being corrupt. So one possibility might be the candidate's ex-wife accused him of corruption. Well, the ex-wife was unhappy with him, so maybe you shouldn't trust that. Maybe the public prosecutor accused him of corruption, or his political opponent. So it does make a difference who made the accusation. And if you just say he was accused, that's passive voice, but you are missing critical pieces of knowledge there. Asian language writing tends to rely on inductive reasoning, starting up by giving information and then drawing conclusions. English language writing, and this is one of the things I was saying earlier, will rely more on deductive reasoning. You start off by stating your argument, and then you look for the support, you present the support. There's a tendency in Asian language writing for authors to avoid criticizing other scholars, where in English language writing it's very common for authors to challenge the work of other scholars. Asian language writing, there's an emphasis on group harmony. In English language writing, there's more of an emphasis on winning debates. Asian language writing has a tendency to avoid contentious statements and to minimize confrontation, whereas English language writing uses contentious statements to provoke discussion. So the fundamental point I'm making here is that if you want to write for an international audience, you have to find a way to appeal to people who are not going to have a lot of interest in local detail. There are different ways you can try that. I've listed some of them in this presentation. But it is a little bit awkward that people are being pressed to publish internationally when they have a lot of local knowledge that is quite valuable. But this is the world we live in, and you're under that kind of pressure. So I hope this may have been a little bit helpful. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, Paul, for a very insightful discussion, I believe. And yeah, we will move on to the question and answer section. So I have several questions here, but yeah, before that, I think one of the most interesting things that I think you said something about how when we are starting our research, it should be based on questions, whereas if you want to start our writing, it should be based on answers. But sometimes we tend to, mix them up. We start our research based on answer, or even start writing based on question. That could be very confusing at times. But yeah, thank you very much for your clarification. So let's start with the first question first. So this is from Poppy Siahaan. So this is just a clarification, I believe. So she asks whether whether it is right that the content of introduction is similar to the content of conclusion, and the difference is that in the introduction it has references, but in the conclusion it does not have references. Whether it is like a repetition of the introduction in different words. Well,
fundamentally, yes. That's what I'm suggesting. That the conclusion, you start off saying, "This is where I'm going." And then in the conclusion, you said, "Okay, this is where I said I'm going. I've gotten there. I've given you evidence." And so the conclusion, you'll probably say, "This was my argument. If you look at the article, you'll discover these kinds of evidence supporting my argument." And then that basically is repetition of what you said at the beginning. Yes.
All right, thank you very much, Paul. So the second question is being asked by two persons. So Rampu and also Subandri. Rampu is is a PhD student in ITB Indonesia, and Subandri is from Sekolah Tinggi Agama Katolik Negeri Pontianak. Both of them ask about in article writing, especially in article writing culture, do you think editors will always consider about the author academic status, such as the master's student, or maybe the writer is a doctoral student, or just a researcher professional? Do the editor consider that? Thank you.
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that if I receive... Okay, in Singapore they have an honors thesis, which is a sort of senior exercise that is done by final year students. Some of these actually have been quite good over the years, and I think some of them probably should be published, but generally speaking, if you submit that kind of thing to a journal, they're going to say no, it's just not at a level that the journal wants to publish. So if you're a master's student, I think what a journal editor is likely to do is to say, let me look at the argument, look at the content, and if it is strong, then they will consider it for publication.
All right, thank you very much for the answer, Paul. I hope it gives some clarification to Rampu and also Subandri regarding the author's academic status. So yeah, again, I would like to encourage all of the participants, if you still have any questions, we're still open for Q&A session. So feel free to direct your question using the Q&A feature. And please also, once again, I would like to remind you, don't forget to put or state your institutions so we can address you correctly. All right, so next question. I think I will go with another clarification question, Paul, if you don't mind. This is from Poppy Siahaan. So so is it correct or not? Do we write the result or the answer to our research question in the abstract?
It's a good idea, yes. What you're trying to do is tell people what the paper is about, and the paper ought to be about the answer to your research question. So you state the answer at the beginning, and then you tell people, I will now explain my reasoning. I will give you the evidence in supporting that. So yes, I think that's a very good idea. In fact, what I would suggest is that the first thing you say in the abstract is the answer to your research question.
Because I think in a way,
I mean, one thing that's a little bit...
Yes, Paul. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Please.
No, I'm just going to say that, an abstract is not very long, but sometimes somebody waits and you read through the abstract and you get down to near the end of it before they actually get to the point. And what I would always suggest is that don't do that. Start off by saying, this is my argument.
All right, thank you very much, Paul. Yeah, because I believe the answer could be like a good selling point in a way for our research and also our writing. And yeah, so next question. This is from Niputu Aryani from Universitas Ciputra Surabaya. He asked, so she's researching about social housing, which is totally different from social housing in developed countries. So most of the articles are from local journals, which are very relevant to Indonesian social housing. However, most international journals require to cite articles from international journals or some from reputable international journals. So how to get around and manage this issue?
Well, two answers to that. One would be the people who probably want to know, need to know about social housing in Indonesia are in Indonesia. So it seems like maybe your audience is Indonesian much more than it is international. However, given that you're probably under pressure to publish internationally, one thing you might do is write about, okay, you say that social housing in Indonesia is different from the international version. So write about that. Compare social housing in Indonesia with what is happening internationally. Because that's the kind of thing that might attract readers.
Thank you, Paul. Yeah, I agree. Because it's the matter of who your target audience is, right? Who your target reader is. So in a way, if you're writing about some local culture, you might as well just connect it with the international side of the discussion. So you can even expand your target audience. So thank you, Paul. So I have a question. The next is from Eka, I believe. In persuading international readers, to what extent that comparative approach to our countries or multiple countries works? So I think it's related to our previous question. Yeah, Paul.
I think that depends on whether you can do it effectively. The problem with that kind of thing is you have to know quite a bit about both countries or the circumstances of whatever topic you're working on. If you do it badly, that is to say you know a lot about Indonesia, but you try to compare it with a place you don't know very much about, then it won't come off.
Okay, thank you, Paul. I hope it answered your question, Eka. Okay, so we have another question from Subandri here. So yeah, he's asking about the templates used with our research and writing. So there are a lot of templates, and most of them are different. So we have like the IMRD or the IMRADC. So what do you think about that?
Depends on your discipline. Some disciplines use IMRD and some don't. Paul Nerney is going to talk a bit about that tomorrow, I think. But the the way to tackle this, I think, is that you look at the journals that you might want to publish in, and you understand from them what sort of structure authors have used. I mean, the IMRD structure is very straightforward, and it means that if you're writing for a journal that wants that, it's very easy for an editor to say, you pick out by looking at the different sections what you've done.
Okay, thank you, Paul. So it really depends on the research that you're doing, particularly. Thank you. I hope that answers your question, Subandri. Next, I have a question from Aryo from University of Indonesia. So first of all, thank you for your excellent presentation, Paul. And the question is, I wonder if you could elaborate more on the issue of how an editor considers an author's authority in a particular research topic.
There are a couple of things to say about that. Obviously, an editor's interested in the background of the author. So, has an author done a PhD dissertation on a particular topic? Or has the author had a research project? So that's one thing. And I guess the point is with that, scholars are not authorities on everything. And once in a while somebody will write about something when they really don't know enough to do it. So if a piece doesn't look right, I guess the way to put it, I mean, usually you can tell when somebody is really writing about something that they understand, and when they're struggling a little bit because they don't know enough about it. But again, I think what an editor is mainly concerned with is the article rather than the author. So if an article is making useful points, if an article fits into the discussions in the literature, then I think that is the critical thing for an editor.
All right. Thank you, Paul. So, content before the authors. So our next question is from Rian from CRCS. Could you mention some examples of answers for the question of who your readers would be? Could I use other scholars' argument as my data by connecting them to address certain issue?
Well, first off, your readers might be different people. So what you're trying to do here is you're trying to tell a story. You're trying to put together an account. And as I was saying when I was doing the talk, readers will have different interests. I was mentioning statistics, and some journals are really interested in statistical data, political science especially, I guess, but and other journals don't have much interest in that at all. So the readers who are interested in statistical data will go to the journals that do a lot of that. So the readers you're going to get will be determined partly by what you put into the article. Then, I mean, you're trying to make a point. Whenever you write an article, you need an argument, and all too many articles don't really have an argument. But you're trying to have an argument, and so the argument will really determine who your readers are. So if you do an argument, well, like I mentioned, say about an election. So if you're interested in social communication and the effect on elections, there are going to be people who study social communication, and so maybe not always about elections, but about social communication in different contexts. So what you can do then is you're focusing on that. Your title, your abstract should call attention to that, so that people who are doing that kind of research will know this is an article they might want to read.
Thank you very much, Paul, for the very elaborative answer. I have another question here from Mama from Unibos Makassar. My question is regarding explanation and interpretation argument. So can I use interpretation first in my paper and then explanation? Or do you think explanation needs to come first, then interpretation? So what are the significant consequences?
Well, in either case, you start off with information, and you have to have something to interpret or something to explain. I don't think it's really, you can do it in either order, but you have to make sure it makes sense to your reader.
Okay, so make sure that it will make sense, basically. Thank you, Paul. Another question from Lucia. I think this is one of the most encountered problems as the writer. Can you give us some advices as to how to trim down our writing or decrease the word count without ruining our point?
Yes. That's a little bit hard to do quickly here. I think the thing that I find in looking at manuscripts is that people fall in love with certain pieces of information that they have, but they don't really need it for the article. So I suppose the main thing to say is that whatever you put into the article needs to be leading to a particular point. And there's all sorts of things in terms of context, or some little story that you might tell that is an aside. And those are the sorts of things you probably want to avoid. So just be sure that what you're saying, that everything you're saying is necessary for the reader to understand your point.
All right, thank you very much, Paul. Okay, so let's see. Do I have any questions again? Yeah, once again, I would like to encourage all the participants, if you still have any questions, since Paul is still here with us, to give you some very expert answer. So I hope you can use the time to ask the question based on the Paul's presentation for today, using the Q&A feature. And yeah, so I'm gonna wait for a couple of seconds. If not, then yeah, I'm sure you can always ask questions throughout our 4 days workshop. So make sure that you will stay tuned for all of our sessions.
We have another question coming in here.
Oh, okay, good. Okay, this is from, we'll still continue because we still have a lot of time, Paul. So this is from Hayadin. Hi, Paul. Could you explain more about information, explanation, and interpretation? Should they be put in a paragraph or in a different paragraph or in a different subheading?
Well, information is the starting point, and any fact, even the simplest fact, you can start asking why and how questions about it. So, I don't know what kind of example. Okay, what did you have for breakfast this morning? And so then if you tell me that, I can say, well, why did you have that? And so you can explore things. And what you want to do with the information you collect is constantly be aware of those sorts of questions. Why something happened, or why something was done, and how it happened. And the article that you're going to write is ideally built on the answer to those sorts of questions, the why questions and the how questions. The interpretation is probably optional in most cases, but it's a little bit frustrating if you have an article that there's an obvious point to be made and the author hasn't made it. So I often go back to elections, and so, okay, who won the election? Well, this person won the election. But that's not the interesting point. The interesting point is, why did that person win the election? How did they win the election? And then the fact that that person won the election has implications. So, okay, there was just an election in Korea. And the commentary that I've seen about that is talking about the political attitudes of the person who won. Now, it was a very tight contest, so I don't know why he won and the other one lost, but it was very close. But then the immediate thing people are starting to do is say, okay, what are the implications for Korea in the future? Now, nobody can know exactly, but this is what people want to know. So 5 years from now, 10 years from now, if somebody's doing research on that election, we'll know what the implications are. We'll know what the outcome was. And that's the kind of thing that, okay, you have the information, he won. By then you have probably some explanation as to why he won. But then the interpretation, what were the consequences of that person winning? And so as an academic, that's the kind of thing you're probably going to want to do. Where if you're talking about, say, a journalist is going to give you the factual information on the spot, where the academic is going to step back, take time to understand over time what has happened.
Okay, thank you very much, Paul. So, yeah, I don't think I see any other question. Let me check one more time. But it's really good to see how people are responding to the answers and discussing with one another in the chat box. So, yeah, we can learn from.
Yeah, well, maybe I might apologize for one thing. In that second presentation, there was some duplication for the first one. Honestly, what's happened today, I was finalizing the presentations, but the first thing that happened this morning was that I tested positive for COVID. So I'm feeling fine, but it's been a rather challenging day. So I'm sorry for the slip up on that.
Well, yeah, I hope you are doing okay.
Yeah, I'm doing fine.
You don't have any symptoms or anything?
Very like a mild head cold or flu. It's so far nothing much, so I think it's going to be all right. But it did mean I didn't get the preparation done as effectively as I would have liked. But, anyway, that's what happened.
Well, yeah, I hope you're doing great. Thank you very much for joining us once again, Paul.
Yeah, my pleasure. Yeah.
We're sorry to hear that, but yeah, get well soon. It's really nice to see you and have you in the middle of us today.
Well, it's nice to be back, and I'll see everybody again on Thursday, I guess. So. Yes,
correct. Thank you very much, Paul. So it is my pleasure to officially commence the part 2 of the IFIS SSRC Academic Writing Workshop. Sorry, I meant to conclude our IFIS SSRC workshop for today on academic writing for international publication. Once again, thank you very much, Paul Kratoska, for your presentations today, and also to all of the participants who contributed questions and also all of the discussion on our Q&A session. And for day 2, which is going to be tomorrow of our workshop, we will begin at 6:30 p.m. Western Indonesian time. We will have Mr. Siddha Chandra, which will be discussing about what reviewers look for, responding to referees' report, along with how to choose the right journal, which I believe is going to be very interesting. And there's going to be a different link for the webinar, which we will drop into the chat box now. And again, I would also like to remind you all that we will, the IFIS will have another conference on June, if I'm not mistaken. So the abstract submission is going to be on April 17th. We will share the info later on. I think I'm going to share my screen just a little bit so you can maybe take a picture or know more about the IFIS MSU conference. So this is the conference on Indonesian studies regarding the emerging discourses and collaborations in a new age. Here you can see that the IFIS MSU conference will accept both the submission for English and Indonesian transcripts. And the deadline for the abstract submission is on April 17th, 2022. Okay. So if you want to know more about this conference, make sure to follow our social media and also our website. We will have all of the information there. So yeah, I think that's all for today. Once again, thank you very much for this remarkable first day. We will see you again tomorrow. Stay safe.